welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning on this almost spring-like day, as Adam said. I'm Penny Mills from the Audience Agency, the Consultancy Director. So I've had fun pulling together our presentation this morning on a little bit of all the things that we've learned and thought about over the last year or two. And I'm joined by my colleague Adam. Do you want to?
I'm Adam Koszary. I'm the head of digital at the Audience Agency, and I'm a white male with bad facial hair and a brown hair and a comb over, and I'm wearing a stripy top.
Obviously, I'm more sartorially presented than Adam, and I've got reddish hair and glasses and a jumper on and a screen behind me. And every now and again, actually, you might not be able to see the furry dog, so welcome everybody. So as you hear, we are recording the session today, so that will be shared with you afterwards along with the slides. So sit back and enjoy. I hope you've got cups of tea and things, or coffee, or whatever your favorite thing to do is. And if you just keep your mics off. There is automatic captioning, so if you need that, you can go to the live transcription button. And if there are any other questions you think or anything you need, then just pop that into the chat and we'll be monitoring that. If you have any questions as you go, if you pop them into the chat, then we can kind of address them at little moments along the way. I'm not sure that I won't be able to see hands up and things like that, so please do pop them in the chat, and then we'll obviously kind of take a few moments every now and again just to have a look at those, or you know, but if you keep your mics off for now, but obviously if you want to, if we want to have a bit of a conversation, we can. I think that's all the kind of bits of housekeeping. So we've got a bit of a presentation. In the chat, you will see we might use a little bit of Mentimeter so that we can hear a little bit from you all as well. So at the beginning of the chat, there are 2 Mentimeters. So if you want to just find a way of going into those, just do the first one first with the number 39431289. I will prompt you at the appropriate moment if you just pop menti.com into, I don't know if you want to do it on your phone or your computer or anything, any other device that you have near. If you don't have Mentimeter, if you can't do that, then obviously when I ask the questions, just pop your thing into the chat. But that would be great. Okay, so let's get on with this. So I suppose it's this, there's lots of buzzwords going around at the moment, and obviously future-proofing is one of those things that sounds kind of at one time impossible, but also you know, how should we be kind of getting on and doing things so that, I suppose, to see our way through what are clearly times where there are quite a lot of surprises, some of them good, some of them bad, and how can we approach audience development planning in a way that feels true and authentic, and doesn't and that has a sort of measured approach to it, so that we are prepared for the things that might come at us. We can't prepare for exactly what they are, but we can have tools in our back pocket, and we can work in particular ways that enable us to be able to address things that we perhaps don't know about yet, unexpected things, and things that we know are on a track and changing, and being able to respond and act accordingly. So we're going to kind of have a little bit of a look at the future, which I will invite you to help me with. Just a little bit of a frame of audience development, since that's what we're talking about, but I think a lot of the things we'll talk about today probably apply in any kind of business planning scenario of whichever part that might be. And then it's the rule of fives today. Everything's in fives. So we've got 5 ways that you might future proof your audience development planning process. And then we'll have a little bit of a review at the end. We are due to finish at 11:30, and we will be doing that on the dot. If you have to go sooner, then that's not a problem. You'll get all the stuff sent afterwards, but hopefully you'll stick it out to the end. I can't promise a big finale, I'm afraid, but you know, we'll give it a go. So I always like to start with a question for you all. So if I can do this, if you go to your Menti, the first question is, I'm just going to stop sharing that and share something else. There's a little word cloud. So in one word, let me just find it. Where's it gone? Okay, I'm just going to have to do. So in one word, what does the future look like for you? If you wouldn't mind popping that into the Menti, that would be fantastic. And I will endeavour to share it. You can see what's going on. I'm hoping you can see that. You won't be able to see it yet because I haven't shared that screen yet. There's some great words coming up there, so thank you very much. Here we go. Right, sorry, that was using that stuff. So, some good words here. And so, oh, it's squiggling around. Great. So yes, we've got some good words here. Challenging, uncertain, uncertainty. And I suppose that's the thing at the beginning, at the center that we can see there, that it is, as we have learned over the last couple of years and going forward, and as we speak, you never know quite what is around the corner. And there are these key words that we're talking about: diversity, hybridity, digital. I'm interested by the word orange, chaos, and a bit of emotion here. Some people are excited by it, and others have anxiety. So, which is obviously all good human responses to the responses, and that it is definitely challenging. We've got some other words that are cropping up all the time: collaborative and co-creation. I don't know, Adam, is there anything that pops out for you? Tight budgets, some very practical challenges.
I think they haven't already covered. It's been an uncertain time for 2 years. I think everyone's expecting it to stay much the same, even though the uncertainty is potentially shifting from the shock of the pandemic to the cost of living crisis and how our audiences are living their lives, and how we take what we learned in the pandemic and almost consolidate and get a bit more confidence in working in a hybrid way. It's something I always see cropping up.
Yeah.
It's nice to see some positivity in there, some
yes.
brightness, as well as the bootstrapping and chaos.
Hope. I like the hope. Oh, let's stop on hope. I think that's lovely. So as you can see, I think, you know, I think bizarrely, we did ask this question maybe 3 years ago to an event about resilience. And I remember sitting there and people were talking about, you know, the possibility of things like low resistance to antibiotics and kind of viruses and pandemics and things. And at that point we were like, well, I suppose so. I suppose that just proves that we live in a time that we're all catching up, we're all playing catch up with, and also that does throw things up that are a bit challenging. So what's useful just to sort of think about the idea of future proofing, because again we use these words, but what do they actually mean? So my default position is to go to the library and Wikipedia, to the internet, and a kind of dictionary and Wikipedia. So I think it's useful. Some of them are, when you look at future proofing, sometimes it's very solely focused on technology, but I think we're obviously thinking broader than that today. So it's something you design or change so that it will continue to be useful or successful in the future if the situation changes. So that's reflective in the things that you have been putting in that word cloud. So it's things that continue to be useful or successful if the situation changes. And I think the Wikipedia one is useful, is thinking about anticipating the future and developing methods of minimizing the effects and shocks and stresses. So I think that's what we're trying to think about today, is we might not be able to anticipate it exactly, but we can think about approaches of minimizing a kind of shock of something different happening that we don't have on our list of expectations. So I think that's a useful thing to do. And I think you know, as we know, it's not just in audience development, it's in the world of economics. And this, you may have heard of Kate Raworth's donut economics, where these new models are coming through, where people are thinking much more holistically, more from a humanity point of view. The donut economics is countering the idea, the economic theory that is all about growth, and that is the only direction you can go. And Kate Raworth suggests this safe and just space between, you know, the things that the environment and the things that go on around us that we need to take care of, and at the core, the things that you know, enable us to live our lives, and that we're finding a balance between those two, which may not be all, well, it's certainly not all about growth, but about an economy that kind of looks after humanity as well as the environment in which we live. So these kind of balances. And I suppose the other thing is finding different ways of working, finding different solutions to similar problems. So this is my favorite cartoon. Maybe we should build a boat instead. In that, you know, there are different ways to get to a point. So, you know, if any period of time in more recent history has told us, although I think these cycles probably come around longer than we think, but more often than we think, this idea that we actually have to think differently and do differently in order to kind of honor, I guess, the values and the vision and missions that, you know, our organizations represent. And I'm sure you've heard quite a lot about resilience and resilient behaviours. We did some work in 2018 before the pandemic to think about what those behaviours are. And they are, you know, essentially, again, akin to sort of future proofing, in that you're looking ahead. And we like this idea that you're bouncing forward, so that you're able to kind of look and find the opportunity, rather than counter the challenges, so that you are leaping over the challenges. So things like well-defined processes for identifying, testing, and implementing new ideas. So we'll come back to that. Tolerating risk and failure. So this idea that not everything's going to work for the first time. Obviously, when we're working in the environments that we work in certain parts of our businesses, there's a risk that is tolerated, but often in other parts it's not, just because it takes money, time, resources. There are reputational challenges and all these sorts of things around what appear to be experimenting and then it not working. Understanding, responding to the needs of audience, customers and visitors and users. This is absolutely at the heart of the audience development planning process. Reviewing on a regular basis, and effective government structures and processes is is that particularly with audience development, but with all aspects of business, it's not the responsibility of one single person or one single department, that everybody has a shared responsibility to be actively involved. So this idea of being resilient is looking forward, bouncing forward, thriving, evolving, being flexible, which came up in our word cloud there, and thinking about the adaptations. And this kind of idea of managing change, you know, we see that sort of traditional change curve, which the first part is sort of anger, denial, and then kind of acceptance, and then finding solution, that we need to sort of work out ways of kind of smoothing our way through the anger and denial, and getting to a kind of using a toolbox for us to think about how we adapt and solve challenges, because we are being thrown so many of those kinds of things. So it would be great just to hear from you again, if you go back to the Menti, just what are there particular challenges that you see for your organization on the second let me come out of this so that I can take it to the next one. On the second question, what's the biggest change your organization is facing? Obviously there might be some similar things to on the previous one, but it would be just bring it back into things that are relevant to you as an organization. If you can just keep them brief, then we can have a look at a few of them. You don't need to, hopefully you're not going to see your own organization name there, but diverse populations, good one.
Oh, sorry, I might have put the wrong code in. So this is the first code, the second slide, is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, sorry to everyone in the chat. So it's back to the first code, which I'll post in again.
There's some quite serious, quite things, socially oriented approach. Capacity is more limited, competition for funding, some restructure, merging, and quite fundamental things. Audiences not behaving in a way that we want them to. Digital skills and resources. Fewer people coming, aging population. So these, if we were going to do a kind of PEST, a political, economic, technology, and what have I missed out? Economic, social. These are all there. So yes, obviously things around funding. So MPO, has COVID really gone away or not? Things that have arisen since, such as the mental health of younger people. Thinking about who our governance, our boards and their diversity. A lot of, and I'm sure a lot of people moving around jobs. So people leaving in from quite senior places within organizations. Getting people to work together, so engaging audiences from different places and convincing them to work and watch together. I think that, and that is the amazing faculty of culture and creativity, is bringing people together. So we want to be able to kind of facilitate those conversations. Transport, climate, world events, education. I think we've got it all there. And when we're talking about audience development planning, all these things, we can't, in a way, it's much more difficult to kind of, thank you very much for that. That's really nice of you to share those with us. Let me just get that into there again. So yeah, when we're thinking about audience development, all these things are, they're about human behavior, they're about change. At the heart of what we're doing is engaging people. So it's that part, and in a way that is that part that is most unpredictable in lots of ways. Gone are the days where we could have a kind of really rigid structure that, on Thursday we're going to do this, on this, and it's these people, and we're going to give them these messages. It's got to be much more fluid and much more responsive. and which, you know, comes with its own pressures. So I'm going to have a little scoot through some kind of, I guess, theory of audience development, just to remind us what we're kind of looking towards. I would just like to think about audience development being, in one way or another, inviting people to do something. And obviously, from our point of view, that's either creative or cultural, or something to do with the arts, something that might be relatively passive, that they can just kind of sit and watch if, in their own home, through to more active where they kind of leaving home. It might be more participative, or you might be looking to get people more involved, whether it's as volunteers or helping to lead and design kind of projects. So, but all the way through, it's an invitation to do something. And we know that invitations, you know, it's a kind of transaction, but in its essence. But within that invitation, we're always looking for, you know, the kind of benefits on either side. And we know that it means a bit of change in terms of if you want to invite people, if you want to invite more people, you might invite different people. You might want to invite people to do more with you. You might want people to do new things with you. All these things in amongst people's lives, if you put them in that kind of context, are things that people encounter every day. And we're adding, you know, we're asking people, inviting people to get more involved with what our organisations offer. And within the organisations, obviously, we're wanting to have greater kind of impact, and to be able to do more things with more people. Obviously, we're limited in terms of our own resources and our own capabilities and our own funding, but it is this transaction. Like with the sort of donut economics, it might not all be just about more people and more growth, but at the same time, you've got to have sustainable organisations. So you have got to think about where the money comes from in order to make you do this. Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat. The future's bright, the future's orange. That's a bit of a throwback to a 90s kind of slogan. I like it. So yeah, just thinking in what dimension we're thinking about audience development. Are we trying to get to know people better? Are we trying to engage them more? We want to engage new people, or are we trying to get people to do different kinds of things, and being really clear what that kind of core purpose is, or how you differentiate between those things? What is it that we're inviting people to do, and what do we as organisations need to do in response? What kind of offer, what kind of invitation? So we have this sort of broad range of principles, and I think, you know, you'll see the themes coming up when we start with resilience. We talk about audience development, that it is an ongoing strategy for change. So you've got to think where you are now and where you would like to be. What's that kind of vision? What's that view of the future? And how do you bring people along with you? A story, a journey, all these kinds of words. Because when you say sort of change, it will, you know, it can be quite challenging immediately. But you know, we're all, you know, things are evolving all the time. So what does that look like? How can we do that? And I think it's always hard to do it over a longer period of time. But in a way, if there are different horizons, whether you're looking at kind of the immediate programming, the immediate season, the immediate offer, and then thinking a little bit further away, and then thinking, actually, you know, what will we look like? What would we look like? And thinking about those different scenarios. Making sure that you are focusing on the things that you as an organisation believe in, that you do, you have the skills for, you have the assets for, and that it's aligned with your own vision, mission and purpose, so that you're not trying to do everything. You know, audience development planning is about putting a frame so that you can say, this is the zone in which we work. This is what we can best offer to people. And that is a completely integrated cross-organisational view. We're going to talk a little bit about how you use evidence so that it is a kind of active, meaningful tool. and you're thinking about, as I said, the different kinds of invitation, the different kinds of people, and the different kinds of offer that you might have. Users are involved, and we love a bit of an evaluation, which I think has been covered quite well at other of our skill set events and other activities. So we won't go in deeply into evaluation today, but it is really important in its softer and kind of harder sort of versions. And I think this is this kind of balance, and you know, there's things like the triple bottom line, all these sorts of things that you're wanting to engage people, offer them something, have that interaction and those kinds of relationships, but you're also putting them at the heart of what you do, whether that's your audiences, your artists, your curators, you know, the people that you work with. There's always this sense of, you know, often a triple bottom line kind of view is called environmental, but this kind of sense of the planet is not only about your own, you know, kind of environmental kind of credentials in terms of what you're, how you're managing your impact on the environment, but also the concerns of your audiences. What are they concerned about? What are they interested in? What can you introduce them to? So again, the planet bit is really that kind of a kind of a balance, and the fact that you don't exist in a bubble. People have their lives. There is an environment around you. You are part of communities, that you're looking out, and as well as kind of absorbing some of what's out there into your organization. And the prosperity, rather than just kind of money, growth, finance, that there's a sense in that, as with those resilience points, that you're kind of thriving and that you're supporting the prosperity of the people you engage, as well as your own organizational prosperity, which might mean not necessarily, you know, lots of secondary spend or, you know, the ticket prices, but how you value what you do, and therefore where other sources of investment may come from because of what you do, through creativity, through culture, through engaging people with their heritage, getting them to kind of look around them and do things. And finally, I suppose this is sort of, I mean, it's a sort of quite generic example of this kind of framework that we're thinking about. So we're not thinking about the nuts and bolts and planning and all the rest of it, but, you know, what does your, when you think about your audience development, what kind of frame do you have? What are your overall arching goals about how you create connections with people? How are you kind of user-centric, and how do you hear the range of voices of different kinds of people that you perhaps want to engage? And what are the strategies that you might use? So whether it's partnership, co-creation, production, you know, mechanisms. So do you always think about the individual? Is it about having conversations? Is it about having ongoing relationships? If you do one thing, what's the next thing? What does that lead to? So these are kind of quite generic strategies that you know, in your audience development planning, you want to think about that are specific. And then these kind of principles, and I think it's a lot of those principles that we'll talk about a bit today. So this might look completely different for you as an organization. It might evolve. This year there might be some very particular things you want to focus on, and another year it might kind of evolve, but there's this sort of, I don't know, strategy temple kind of idea. And finally, another little audience development tool. So this is a little bit of a scoot through, something that can take, you know, a whole week to work our way through in sort of training terms, but a little taster of this idea of the Ansoff matrix in terms of structuring what you want to be doing. So that I think the important principle, I suppose, is that you're not thinking of everything that you're doing and offering and thinking of all the different kinds of people that would be possible to give it to, or how, you know, we need to make sure that everything we do is laden, and it has to have, you know, we have to think about diversity for it. We have to think about accessibility. We have to think about the messaging. We have to make sure that we're using every social media platform. So I think it's kind of breaking it down and thinking, actually, who are we engaging? What is the purpose? What's that dimension for this particular group of people, what can we look at strategically over a period of time. So we have this Ansoff matrix we've kind of stolen from other places, but it's really quite helpful when we think about the bottom left box, where we're thinking, these are the people we know, this is the product and program that we do on a regular basis, it's established, these are people that we understand, and we're thinking about how you engage them more, how you think about their loyalty, how you think about their frequency, and how you think about how they might help you reach more people kind of like them. Obviously, you can have different segments and different types of people within that market penetration, and it's all connected to your offer in different ways. Above that, you have, this is what we do, but how do we invite new or different people into that offer? And I think we'll talk a little bit about how that takes adaptation. It's not, you might have to make some tweaks to your messaging. You might have to make some tweaks about how people enter into your experiences, or engage with you and the offer and the things that you offer. It's not simply, saying this is what we do, and we're just going to kind of put a message out about it that you might connect with, but we're not really going to change what we do and how we do it. So there might be some little tweaks, but that's where that bottom right hand corner comes. If you think you have to adapt, evolve, or change, or offer something completely different in order to engage that new market, you may well have to do some product development. Likewise, to keep people engaged, to keep people refreshed with what you do, and to take them on a journey, you might think about doing things and offering things that are slightly different. And then you have the diversification box, which is where you think there is something that we don't do, but there is an audience we would like to engage, and that's both new for you. And this helps you prioritize. It makes, so obviously the return on investment commercially in the bottom left box is much higher. This is your sort of, I guess, in that, it's not very PC now, is it? The other things that call that other sort of cash cow box. The sort of, yes, high return on investment. Other areas need a little bit more investment and a bit more resource, a bit more exploration. So we'll talk about those sorts of things. And therefore the return may not be immediate and maybe over a period of time. And obviously the diversification box needs a lot of investment, and the return might not be, it might be over a longer period of time. So this helps you both, give you a kind of structure, and it helps you think about prioritization, it helps you think about how you might invest in these different areas. And clearly you can't be operating at full power in all of these boxes all the time. So again, you might look at a program or an offer or a year and think, actually, we'll be focusing, this is a brilliant thing for just really having great conversations with the people we know and love, and they know and love us, and we can think about how we might develop them. Whereas these are more experimental, or they're more newer to us, and we need to kind of approach them with that frame, but you don't want to be doing that for everything that you do. Okie dokie, moving swiftly on. Right, so now our rule of 5. So I'm not going to tell you them all up front. It's going to be a voyage of discovery, but I think you've probably got an inkling as the sorts of things that we'll be talking about in this zone. But at this point, if I just stop sharing for a second, has anybody got any particular questions? If you where is there I'm not sure that I can see anybody's particular, I'm not sure I can see hands up at this point. Just because I don't want to feel that it's a bit tricky for us all to have a big conversation, because there's so many of us, which is fantastic. Lee Johnson, I can see your hand, brilliant. Do you want to come off mute and then you can?
Hi, hello. This is really, really interesting, and from a completely selfish point of view, the halls is currently going through a massive change. We've got some towns funding. We're making the building fit for purpose. I've been there since August. The halls is probably a little bit lost in the sense that it doesn't really have any kind of focus or direction. So we're kind of getting that together, and we currently don't program any of our own events. So we're essentially a dry hire venue. And although that's probably going to change this year, we're unable to say who our audience is. So our audience are the promoters. So for example, if the Theatre Royal in Norwich were going to put a show on at the halls, they would be our audience. And then whoever they sell the tickets to is their audience. So at this moment in time, I'm kind of looking at how I can actually develop audience and try and work out who our audience is. So all I'm doing at this moment in time is for events that come in, I'm recording the numbers down, and there are an approximate age range of the audience. That's all I can do at this moment in time. So it's how about attracting new audiences, and how basically how we can get new audiences in, and kind of continue to build on our current audience, even though they're not our audience, if that makes any sense at all whatsoever.
Yeah,
I appreciate we've only got till 11 o'clock, so
no, exactly. I mean, I suppose what we're talking about today is how you can think about the frame in which you develop that audience development kind of direction. And obviously, sadly, getting evidence about who they are is a real core kind of part of that. There are other resources and things that we have where you can kind of think about the marketplace, I guess, in Norwich, and think about what it is you're programming, what the halls is there for if you're going through that kind of process. So I think that is a fundamental thing. It's not something we're going to cover in a lot of detail today. I think the other thing, well, we have had we've had sessions about audience development planning. So this is really about how we think ahead, and think about what the relationships are. And I suppose that is, in a way, your audience is those hirers. So where are they at? And that is something that's a little bit more kind of practical to do, is why are they coming to you? What are they expecting from you? And I think today that, they are part of your audience. They are part of the people that make what the halls are. And without, as you say, that direct contact. So hopefully there are some things in today that help you think about, actually, they are part of your team. They are part of the thing, what your offer is, and they are your audience. So maybe thinking from today in that context, that why, what are you offering them? What are they getting from you? So hopefully, but we can point you to lots of other resources around bringing together that view. But I get your challenge, absolutely. Sorry, Lisa.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Penny. I'm Lisa, and I've recently been working with Leeds 2023 on audience development on some signature projects. Of course, outdoor events have become ever more popular.
Sorry to interrupt you, Lisa. Somebody has just shared their screen, just in case you didn't mean to be doing that. Sorry, Lisa, carry on. They've stopped.
Thank you. Of course, outdoor events have become increasingly popular during COVID, and will continue to be so. And we all know that outdoor events attract people simply because they're outdoors and often free. I'm curious about how we attract people who don't necessarily believe outdoor events are for them, and wouldn't necessarily think of going. So perhaps that might come up in the presentation, but I'm curious in exploring that field, as it were.
Well, I think there are a few things that come up. Just, I mean, in a way, these are the tools in which you find out more about those people, or think about what that kind of how you build relationships with those, and what their relationship to you or the outdoor events or things kind of might be. So we'll come back at the end and pick that up, and again with you, Lee, as well. I think there's lots of advice, Lee, in the chat for you about some of these challenging things. I mean, it's a sort of touring dilemma, and the hires dilemma, I think, is always there. Okay, we'll take one more question just a moment. Kathy from Brighton Early Music.
Hello there. It was just very quick. Oh, sorry, there you can see me as well. It was just very quickly to reply to Lisa, just to say, like you, we've done a lot of, well, we've been exploring outdoor events in the last year because that has been obviously appealing for audiences, and we've definitely found that the indoor audience and the outdoor audience are different, and has given us some opportunities to find new audiences who wouldn't necessarily come. We're usually an autumn festival, so we found very much the audience who would usually come and sit in a church in October is different from the audience who might come along in June outdoors and bring a picnic and yeah, explore an outdoor event. So I totally agree with you that some audiences won't come to outdoor, but I think that there are other audiences who probably wouldn't come to indoor, and the challenge is reaching those audiences. And so it's a challenge and an opportunity for us, we think.
And we have got on our website, which we can again provide a link for you. We've done quite a lot about outdoor arts audiences. So they are, I mean, there's this amazing thing, as you say, Kathy, that it does attract different kinds of demographic, and often people who are much more kind of local to an area, who are, you know, engaging because it's local, because it's their community, and all those sorts of things. On the other side, yeah, you can't necessarily, you know, it's a social thing in the way that going into a venue might be, but it's got, you know, there's a different kind of sensibility about it. On the other side, they're not necessarily, just because they do the outdoor, going to make that journey to indoor. So it's that matchmaking. If you want to engage a community, you go to them, you think about what their interests are, and you take them from there. So I think that's probably a quite interesting thing around outdoor arts. But you know, the outdoor arts sector is really developed now, and I think it's really quite amazing, some of the work that has been done in all sorts of different ways, obviously not least in the last couple of years, but prior to that. And Lou has put the link to our little outdoor arts thing in the chat, so thanks, Lou. Great. Okay, so we're just going to flip into our 5 things. So we're really thinking of ways that you can work and how you think about things, and you know, this doesn't require you to have loads of data. It requires you to have a consciousness about what it is and what you're doing. So the first one is learning from experience. So this can be a kind of embedded sort of use of a muscle in terms of how you're working, and that you might try something, or you might observe something and think, that's got something about this. So it might be observing the nature of the types of people who engage outdoors, or who come through different kinds of hirers in the 2 examples that have come up at the moment. But it's also thinking, well, what was it working? Was it not working? And that you, in this kind of future-proofing scenario, you may not, you need to kind of come out of your kind of structures in a way, and not only just, I guess, have a look, evaluate against what you kind of thought previously, but think about how you loop back and say, why did I think that? Was that because I had some evidence of something before that's how it turned out to be? Or is it because I had an assumption which actually is not quite right? So I think, you know, there's lots of things being talked about, kind of systemic changes, that you can't just present something and design it and then ask people if they want to engage with it. Actually, you've got to think about, well, why did I design it in that way? And what is there particularly about what we're doing that engages people? and what doesn't. So we've got this idea of double loop learning, which looks and starts with why you're doing something, how you're doing it. Sorry, it starts in the middle in a way, in that you have a particular reason why you're doing things, and they are stemmed from your assumptions and your experience and your instinct and your knowledge. And then people engage, or they don't engage, or they enjoy it, they have a good time, they tell their neighbors. But if within that there's something that you can't quite explain, or you can't quite understand, or you're curious about, or that surprises you, you might then go back and look at your kind of underlying assumptions. So we have a scenario where in one kind of community development project that they felt that they could do lots of creative activities in the centre of town, and because the centre of town is where lots of people come in and out, and they, you know, it attracts a quite diverse range of people. But what they discovered, that it was just attracting, you know, the usual profile of cultural engagers, and that the people in the communities who lived out of town were not coming into town for those activities. And so their assumption that people use the town centre and from different parts of the community, B, that they would be willing to come in and do activities away from their own kind of communities and places, and see that that would be, you know, a reason why they wanted to engage, and that they wanted to go and enjoy that with lots of different people from different communities in a town centre. And actually having programmed something that had lots of, I guess, activity at the centre, that organisation had to really turn around and make quite a brave decision to say, actually, maybe this is the wrong way of doing it, and that we actually have to go and do things with the communities in their own places. One day they might, you know, we can perhaps draw them in to celebrate, but we have to go into the communities and work with them there, which means that you have a much more dispersed model. You have to develop different things for each community. So that embedding this idea that if things aren't working, or it's not coming out in a way that you might have expected, that you might have to go back to your initial kind of underlying assumptions. And it's actually quite useful in these processes when you're working with people who are not immersed either in the kind of marketing or programming, that you have a sort of critical friend who can kind of look at the data and go, hang on a minute, you know, the reason why we're here was to do this, and it's just not happening, because you want to hope that things are happening in the way that you had designed and planned. So this idea of reflective learning, taking the time to think, actually, let's just see what we're programming. Let's just have a look at it. Let's just look at where we're programming things, how we're programming things, and think, what are our questions about whether we are engaging with the different people that we want to or not? What is that kind of array of offers, and are there different audiences for each bit? So this idea of double loop learning and embedding in our practice a kind of facility to loop back and go, okay, that all seems to be working, but this bit is not doing quite what we expected it to be doing. As we've just said, there's lots of you have to have evidence. You have to you have to have evidence. You have to think about the insight that you can collect. I'm not saying that has got to be vast quantities of evidence or user research or qualitative groups. You have to do it proportionally to what's possible for you to do and what is useful. But there are ways of looking at that that enable you to give it some kind of meaning, I suppose. And so that might be involve drawing on other kinds of data, but also so I'm quite big into things like BBC Bite Size and things at the moment, because my daughter's at that level, and they were doing science experiments, and I just thought it was a really nice kind of metaphor to think about what they call doing a kind of fair test that often we set ourselves up to kind of do things that we haven't really thought through the component parts of, just because we have lots of assumptions along the way. So this idea about, you know, simply, I don't know, doing a little science experiment. The latest one is how to make salt out of rock salt. You know, what are the steps along the way? What do we think is going to happen? And how can we conclude that it really has kind of happened? So being really clear about our research questions, about, you know, in examples that we've had so far, you know, if we want to do outdoor work, why are we doing it? What is it that we want to find out? Do we want to find out whether that's the right place to do a piece of outdoor work? Is that the right place? Do we want to see if it does attract people who perhaps don't go into cultural venues? Do we want to have it a role for the community? So really thinking about the purpose, the research question you have, it's not just about, you know, did you have a good time, or, you know, was the access great, but actually bigger questions. And then create your kind of hypothesis. So if we do this, you know, we hope that people from, you know, that estate over there right next to the park are going to come. And you have to think, well, what are we doing in order for that to happen? Then you do your experiment, or you put on your event, you do your thing, and then you do the analysis. And the analysis could be research, or it could be more complex. And I like this thing of doing a kind of fair test, that sometimes you might have to do it a few times. I think there was this idea of one orchestra that did late night concerts, and instead of saying we're just going to do one and see what happens, they said we're going to commit to doing, you know, 3 or 4 of these to see whether they actually make a difference. I have a little question there, Anna, if you got a question.
Yes, thank you. You said about bigger questions regarding evidence. Could you please give some examples of these bigger questions?
I suppose the bigger questions are, we the right people to be programming something like this in the park? You know, the bigger questions are, if we do this, present this piece of work, or if we put this piece of interpretation in, is it going to work for a particular audience that we would like to attract? As you know, if you're thinking about that kind of product development in the ANSOF, it might be, does providing digital audio tours enable people with particular access needs to enjoy our exhibitions more? So I think, you know, it's not the sort of questions about what was your motivation, how did you find out about it, or you know, what are the demographics. It's the questions about the how and the why and the who, I think. Does that help? Oh,
Yes, thank you.
Fire alarm at the Barbican. Sorry about that. Hopefully you'll be back. That's quite big. Right, so there are a couple of techniques that you might be useful. So one of these, I think there's a lot around evidence and insight where you want to involve other people, and people tend to sometimes latch on to little bits of statistics. Like I was looking at something and they said our population has got a large proportion of younger people, therefore we have a cultural audience. Now, a large proportion of those younger people were university students, who we know are notorious for not engaging beyond the walls of their universities. So we're trying to not look at data and make those assumptions. And this Twyman's law, which I quite like, I'm not sure about the cartoon, but that when people kind of, if you find something in your data that you go, oh my goodness, look, we've got loads of these, you know, Facebook families who are engaging with what we're doing, and, you know, that's great. And then, you know, anything that looks odd, you should always question and go back to the data. So whether, you know, whether you find a mistake in the data, or whether you think actually there's something about a particular event and therefore we got a lot of a particular segment in what we were doing. And the other tools that we look at are ones to kind of help us realize that. So there's Twyman's law, triangulation. So, you know, look at different kinds of data, look at different kinds of methods. So if you have got a bit of demographics, look at that, use your observation techniques, as well as thinking that how you might sit down and have some conversations with people. So draw things from different places. And this is obviously where things like benchmarks kind of come in. So when we look at things like these portraits for the audience spectrum segments, you know, you're looking at the geography, you're looking at the lifestyle of people, and you're looking at how they might engage digitally. So you're drawing together all these different bits of information to bring meaning to your data rather than looking at that one statistic. And the final one is just thinking about how you then use it for decision making. So think about when you're doing that hypothesis, if lots of people think this, can you do something differently? Will you change it for those people? So it might be that people say, I can never work out where to go when I come into your building. Lots of people say that. It's really important. How do you improve that wayfinding? So it's a large quantity of people, a really serious issue. There might be other things where there are fewer people, which might be about some accessibility facilities that somebody has some feedback on that you have to do something about because you have to be accessible. There might be other things where it's, you know, the wine's a bit expensive in the bar and you go, actually, that's not something we're going to do anything about. So again, when you see your evidence, you're thinking in a frame, what am I going to do something about? And why would we focus our efforts there to do something and something differently? So that you're constantly evolving, you're constantly thinking how you can make small incremental changes, but also thinking in that future-proofing way about conserving your own resources. Number 3 is be user-centered and empathize. So this, I think, is back to some of the things that we were coming up there, is there are various tools that can help you, which you don't need loads of data for to be in the first instance, but you might take, you know, imagine the different audiences for the different parts of your programming, whether you do it or whether they're hires, and think actually you could characterize that audience in this way. You can have a think about the people who might or might not engage in outdoor arts in this way, but you want to be as specific as possible. Where are they from? Who are they? What other things are they doing in their life? Why would they choose us or choose this activity over someone else? And these are, you know, you might come up with what you feel are kind of stereotypes, but actually you're thinking, you're putting yourself in the shoes of the other people who you want to engage. And part of that is thinking about what's impacting on their lives. So we talked about the cost of living. We know there are issues of inclusion. We think there are issues of sort of physical and psychological kind of access. That other things might be taking up people's time. So if you think about people's life stages, and that might unlock things for you, which say, well, of course we can't engage with those people at that time in that way because they're busy doing this other thing at that moment. So it's a kind of exercise, and you might have gaps, and you might then need to go out and ask people. Oh, this keeps saying things. So you might come up with these pictures, so you can do it as a creative exercise internally. And you're just thinking about people's lives and what they're doing and what's impacting on those. And I think that's obviously quite a really important thing at the moment, where you might feel, as someone put in the thing, that some people, you're losing some people, and thinking about why that might be, what else is occupying their lives at the moment. And then, you know, create these ideas. These were done sort of thinking about what was happening to people during lockdown. So this kind of family groups. So you can have, you know, you can kind of think laterally about these things, that people were left to go, you know, your engagement was outdoor, or Joe was entertaining you at home, that you couldn't go to school, therefore, you know, your relationships with lots of people was relied on kind of WhatsApp, and that you were finding creative ways to engage children and get them to be involved and understand with what was going on around them in homeschooling. So you can create these pictures of what's happening with people, and then evolve them, build on them as you learn about the different people that engage with you as an organization, that they're not static things, that you're constantly adding to that knowledge and understanding. Another tool is this idea of a journey map. So what do they need to go through and plan and decide and look for and think about as they decide to engage with an organization. So the user journey mapping. So these are, some people have said, oh, I've not had much luck with doing these sorts of things, but I think if you see them as kind of exercises that helps you unlock your thinking and lets you think and look and understand from different perspectives, and you might well do these, you know, not just for audience members but for participants or volunteers or other partners that you might be working with. And you can make them creative. They are a research tool. You can ask people to go on those journeys and log the things that are good, the high moments, the lower moments, the things that really engaged with them, and get them to have to kind of tell their stories. And then finally on this, from an audience engagement point of view, you're wanting to kind of break this down. Who is engaging and how? So how do you match that audience that you want to engage with the activity and offer? What are the mismatches? What are the things that are not quite connecting there? What do they connect with? We know that there's a lot about people having a bit more kind of agency about what it is that they want to do, looking for more kind of emotional, social impacts. What might be meaningful? How does that fit into their lives? And then what benefit do they get for it? What do they take away after they've had your experience, and what will bring them back? And we know, I think the great thing is that people have connections to places, to buildings, to communities, and that is the hub, rather than from the people that might come in and out to kind of offer that. So from a hires point of view, that relationship is with a place that they go and see things. And so that is really important in terms of thinking about what relationship they have with a building or a place or a park or a town centre. I'm going to just take a little breather. So if this is a moment that you need to just you just need to step off the screen for a couple of minutes, then please feel free to do that, and then we'll hand over to Adam. There's a question here for Adam, if you want to do it. Is anyone using TikTok for audience development?
I think it'd be interesting to hear from other people as well. Yeah, I mean, there are a few places using TikTok, but the places I've seen them doing it well have taken a lot of the things that Penny has been talking about. So they're only using it if it's relevant to the audience they're trying to reach, but also if it plays to the strengths of your organization. So obviously it helps if, say, you're a theatre or performing arts, or there are things generally happening around the place. It's not necessarily a museum where most of the day it's just galleries and people walking around. Unless you're somewhere like the Black Country Living Museum, obviously the most followed museum on TikTok, you have that cast of volunteers and actors you can play to TikTok's trends, which is telling stories in a very visual way, playing on trends and memes. But they can do that because they already have the staff skills and they could easily adapt it to TikTok. But I've seen even Leeds, I can't remember if it's the Leeds Archive, the gallery or the museum, but they've also used it as a really good staff tool. So they found someone on staff who can who's already got that kind of personality and the ideas, and they know how to adapt it to what people are already looking at on TikTok. But you kind of need to already know you're looking for that demographic on TikTok, what you're trying to get them to do. For the Leeds, it makes sense because they're a university institution. They're trying to get students engaged. Black Country Living Museum, they're trying to expand their global audience and get people interested in going to the sites. But is it relevant for you? And what can you adapt from what you're already doing and who you've got, rather than just killing yourself trying to adapt to a whole new platform when we're already killing ourselves with Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And yeah, what Kathy is saying, if you don't understand the platform, you definitely shouldn't be on it. but that's not to stop you from taking little experiments to learn. You don't have to go in at the deep end. You can just be trying little things and seeing how it goes. Lisa, I can see your finger up.
Yeah, I love the idea of using cast and volunteers who are already on the platform and working with them to understand what works best and doing it that way. That's a brilliant, brilliant thought, Adam, and I'll take that forward as a bit of an experiment to try with. Thank you.
Usually I just start talking and I have no idea what I'm going to say, so it always helps when some of it is useful. And yeah, I think because my previous job before coming to the audience agency was doing social media and editorial content for the Royal Academy. And even us as a national institution, we just couldn't find the time to dedicate to learning an entire new channel, learning all these new skills of video editing and production. We had to have a really strong case that this would bring in new users that we weren't currently reaching, that it would result ideally in ticket sales or some other kind of impact. And we needed that ready before we could say, oh, we're going to dedicate probably 50% of our time over the next 2 months, learning all the ins and outs, having a strategy and jumping in. I did hear that TikTok fund gave the VNA about 10 or 20 grand just to do that, which is really annoying.
I'd love to talk to you about that further, if I may.
Yeah, sure. I think our emails are going to be on the presentation.
Great.
Please get in touch.
Thank you.
Sound has gone a bit funny.
Could be my internet.
The sound has gone a bit funny, so I don't know. I'm just wondering if anybody else is having.
I can hear you.
Anyway,
okay.
yeah, so I think it's the resource, isn't it? But it goes back to that thing is, you know, which audience you're trying to reach. So you are becoming. Sorry. Oh. I think it's about, you know, matchmaking between, you know, is that an audience and a platform that match each other? Right. I'm hoping that can somebody just tell me whether they can hear me or not?
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you, but there's just a bit of an internet issue, I think. Cuts in and out sometimes. Maybe that's just my issue.
Yeah. It might.
And now I think Penny has fallen off. But I think everyone's back, and I do have my bit of the presentation. So while we wait for Penny to come back, I will move straight into my bit, which should only take 5 minutes anyway. Because this is more about testing. And I ummed and ahed about what to do for my bit, because I was asked essentially by Penny, how do you future-proof audience development against digital change? And it's almost a length of a piece of string, because we could be looking at all the data that we get from our digital channels, how we incorporate that into our thinking. We could be looking at exactly those kind of questions, like how do we adapt to these new channels? What kind of questions should we be asking? Is there a way of testing of when is the right time to experiment with something, when it's reached critical mass, when you should leave it for a bit because you're not quite ready? All of those sort of questions. But in the end, I've looked for user testing, because I feel like we never quite know what's coming down the line, but it is all about the mindsets and going back to the user to make sure that what you're producing, how you're getting your ideas into content and digital products actually fits what people want and how they use digital technologies and the internet. And it does touch on a lot of what Penny has been saying about personas and journey mapping and that unlocking of thinking. And user testing is essentially, rather than say you have an idea, you have an event and you know you have to publish a video or put it on Facebook, or you have a new project, so we'll just make a web page for it, or we need to tell people about this project, so let's just do a tweet. It is going back and thinking, how would this actually land with the people we're trying to reach? what is the best way to get them to do the thing that we want them to do, and ideally what they want to do. And it's a great tool for also challenging your institutional thinking, because I'm sure everyone has worked with someone who says, oh, this definitely needs a Facebook post, or oh, let's develop an app for this, or we just need to live stream this in my house without the right equipment. And rather than you just saying that's a bad idea, it's a way of saying, actually, if you're trying to reach this audience to get them to do this particular thing, we have tested it with that audience, or we've tested it against this persona of an audience we've already made, and we've identified all of these issues along the way. And in the most recent example in the project, it's how the local council were forcing a council museum to use Microsoft Teams for their online events, when everyone is used to using Zoom and be able to just click into the event straight away. Microsoft Teams forces you into a kind of sign-up process. You might be logged into the wrong Microsoft accounts, and it's essentially just a pain in the arse, and they were dropping like 50% of their visitors. So it's a way of saying you need to change if you want to be successful. And it's also about this raised user expectations. Everyone is used to Amazon one-click deliveries, Netflix, easy booking of events, easy access to content. If we're not making what we produce online as easy as possible to access and enjoy, then people will probably just go on to something else unless they're very dedicated. But it also identifies the kind of gaps in your offer. So say if you're creating something directed at a young audience and you know they're using TikTok, and what your original idea was, you've identified it just wouldn't reach that young audience because, say, they are all on TikTok and you've seen a decline in youth engagement with your other channels. It's a way of just keeping up and thinking, what are the new tools available to us in getting this message or offer out there into the world? I've got an example down here from, where was it? It was the Whitney Museum of American Art. And it is essentially this idea that you set people a task to do a thing. It could be an audio guide, it could even be an article, it could be a piece of content, it could be trying to find something on your website, but it's setting them a task, seeing how they achieve that task, what difficulties they run into, what works well, and then using that recommendations from your findings to tweak and change what you're going to publish to make it as easy and successful as possible. It's a fairly straightforward process in a sense. You need to define that target audience in the first place. So even at this stage, it's a good thing for maybe less audience-minded colleagues to say who you're trying to reach, what do they look like, what do we know about them? And it goes back to the persona mapping and audience research that Penny was talking about. You obviously need to define the task and a goal. So even in the case of an article, you could be saying we want people to actually click through from a social post and to read the article, and then potentially to do something afterwards, like sign up to a newsletter or come to an event or whatever that goal might be. But that is what you are testing, whether people get to that end of that task and do what you were hoping they would do. You then need to recruit users. You might already have focus groups that you interact with. You could have specialist user groups that you interact with, like teacher groups. You could even just be picking people up on sites and asking them if they could spare 10 minutes just to test something with you. You'd be surprised how many people are willing to do that. But at worst case scenario, you could even just pick up friends and family, but obviously because they know you, they might be saying things you want to hear rather than actually the things you need to hear. You also don't need to have a finished product. You could be using something you've already published. It could be your website as it is. In the example up in the top right, I've got something from the Science Museum where they drew out what they expected their app to look like on pieces of paper, and they just had different pages and parts of that app on different bits of paper. So when they said, oh, I would probably tap on this square, they would then give them the next piece of paper and see how far they got. And when you've set them that task, you need to sitting with them, you need to be asking them to speak their thought process out loud. So I've sat in sessions where people have been saying, I've been trying to get people to say to a particular museum object on the catalogue, and they were saying, oh, I'll click on collections because that sounds about right. And then suddenly they go off on a tangent where they've somehow ended up on our blog page or something. and they're just saying, well, I found a dead end, I'm getting a bit frustrated, I'm not quite sure what to do here, the menu's disappeared, all of these kind of things that we could then go back and fix. But you've got to avoid that urge to intervene, because you know you're so close to these kind of things. You know, you want to say, no, you need to click on this, you need to do this, but it's all about sitting back, absorbing what they're saying, and having a list of criteria that you're measuring. So do you find this navigation easy? Do you find these images attractive? Do you find the way this is written appeals to you, or doesn't appeal to you, and why? But not trying to lead them with your questions. And obviously sharing the results with colleagues, because very often sometimes I'm using this as a tool for testing something I'm producing. Sometimes it's a way of convincing other colleagues that what they're doing isn't necessarily the most effective way of achieving what they want to achieve. And it's much more powerful coming from a user than coming from you, because people don't take me seriously usually. Penny talked about personas. I think rather than sitting people down, if you have a persona ready, to save time, you could just be testing your contents against these user personas, when you could be asking questions like, we need to get this word out about this event, and we're testing against this persona of Dave, who's a local Facebook family user, say. But you have to be thinking, which channels do they use? If we put this event on Twitter or Instagram, is that pointless because they primarily work through Facebook? Are these kind of people we're trying to attract? We know they're time poor. They tend to use their mobiles. Do they rely on friends' recommendations? When you're asking for people to get interested in things like events, do you need to specify time commitment rather than saying to this unspecified big events? Are they the kind of person that prefers videos? Do they want a long read? Do they just want quick snippets on social media? So are you trying to get them through a deeper dive, or is it just trying to grab their attention? Is what you're trying to achieve more practical? Is it more of a thought piece? Is it something fun? So how do you pitch this piece of content? Because you could be writing an article in 5 different ways, or a headline of an article in 5 different ways, depending on who you're trying to reach. It could be cast as a quite serious article. It could be a list article. It all kind of depends on what that persona finds interesting and wants to do. I know very often comes back to personality. So what's the right approach? Say if you're an art gallery and you're trying to get art historians, you might be going for the straightforward and formal. Or if you're trying to reach a broader audience, you may be trying to make it a bit more accessible, informal and funny. But again, that's good for coming back to colleagues to say we're taking this approach because we're trying to reach this audience and we need to do it in this way. And actually thinking through that user process. So will your content actually get people to do the thing you want them to do? How will this add value to their lives when they're so distracted by the million other things they could be seeing and doing online? And do you need to specify that, yeah, this will take 5 minutes. At the end, you will learn this or achieve this, or here's a little tidbit to get you interested in clicking through. And when people have got through, say, to an article page, if you're trying to get them to sign up to a newsletter, have you actually included that on the page? Because otherwise it's all just a pointless endeavor. But that is user testing. It's essentially, it's not, you could be doing it for big projects, sitting down with users, going through the whole process. But it's also just something you need in the back of your head once you have an idea of your audiences, just thinking, will this actually work for them? What do I need to change to make it work? And before I go on, I'm just going to check if Penny is back with us. She is. I might hand over back to Penny for the next bit.
Sorry, that's brilliant. Sorry, my internet had a little bit of a wobble. I think that there's one kind of final bit of that kind of testing, which is this idea that you might kind of just, you know, get on and do some things and see what happens, which obviously is a little bit more kind of high risk from that point of view. But it's so we had an example here of so these kids running around these blobs on the ground, this sort of idea of more kind of creative, the sort of bringing in some creative tools into the consultation which might engage people within your organization, but not using creative tools for the sake of it, but actually using them quite purposefully So they wanted to engage younger people with the difference between bacteria and viruses. So they created this game that kids could kind of chase around and do things, and they had other kind of bits that would tell them what they were doing. But what was interesting is that they thought that obviously it's a nice game, you put it in a park, but of course apart from it being winter when they tried to test it, the majority of people they found who were in parks were kind of walking dogs, because, or you know, they weren't for stopping necessarily, and that the parks that they were chosen as well were not reaching some of the people that they wanted to have that conversation about viruses and bacteria, and that actually it worked much better when they did the same thing but near a shopping centre in town. So it's trying these things out to sort of to say, actually, if we want to engage a particular demographic, we might have to put it somewhere quite particular. And that there was a sort of an assumption that parks are where kids and families of all types hang out. As it turned out, in Swansea, that wasn't the case. So I think, and just thinking about all the other ways that you can get feedback in quite a light way, whether you have stickers or cards or comments books, as well as more kind of formal surveys. And when you really do want to kind of get people to engage with you, the simple cup of tea has been proved to be a great way of engaging people. So I think that any of or all of those kinds of conversations and ways that you can kind of have that conversation, as well as the formal testing approach, enables you to learn and keep learning. I'm going to do this very quickly because it will be in the slide set, and it's a bit of a kind of summary. So and then we'll have 5 minutes for the end for anything else. So this was my 5 ways to audience development wellbeing. So just reiterating these things. So this is thanks to the New Economics Foundation, who I'm sure some of you are familiar with this kind of framework, but connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, and give. So I think we've talked a lot about how you can connect and use those personas and involve people with what you're doing. Thinking about the different kinds of ways that you might engage people. So that invitation, you might consult with them. They might be more involved with what you're doing. And I think particularly in the outdoor arts, or where you're taking things to where into people's communities, that you should be having that conversation so that they're having a they're inviting you rather than the other way around, that people have this hyperlocality and things like that, but it's not our job to sort of appropriate places necessarily, but to be in conversation. CLANG, oh right, that is a brilliant acronym, because I can always get to 4 ways to wellbeing. So CLANG, everyone should remember, is how to remember all 5 ways to wellbeing. So this is being proactive, but you can't sit back and just see. So as Adam has just said, you've got to test, you've got to get out there, you've got to have those conversations. And whether it's co-designing a survey and testing that out with people, or whether it's co-designing, how the community are involved, whether it's, co-designing a program with a range of producers and promoters, just being active in that. This is the latest thing I've heard, is that that you need to find moments of reflection and take time. And this is apparently the latest thing to do, is to sit in a barrel of cold water that makes you stop and think. Might not be the thing that you want to do, but she looks happy, so there we go. This idea of keeping them learning, so we talked about that double loop, but we're all very active, action orientated, producery type people, and actually sitting back and thinking, actually, what have we learned? And Adam, I think this follows up on what you were saying as the final one.
Yeah, and I think particularly when it comes to content, is coming back to the story you're trying to tell. It's not just pumping things out and broadcasting. It's actually the narrative of your institution, how you can tell that narrative, not just through words, but the pictures and videos that you're using, and using your data to reflect on what is working and what isn't working. But you've got to remember that people are people, and they're not necessarily looking for the standard crap posted on the internet. They're looking for something to entertain them, something that's fun. And making content specifically online should actually be fun. It's a time to be creative, and find new ways of saying what could be quite a dull message, but even telling the story of how this project has come about, why you're doing this event, what's been happening around your institution. I think it's why TikTok is a difficult one to adapt for, because it's a different type of storytelling, but you can be doing storytelling on all your channels through everything you're saying, not just for your content and marketing, but on site, how you interact with your visitors, all the rest. I think that's a gist of it, isn't it, Penny?
Yeah, and sharing that with your colleagues, being transparent about what people are saying, not kind of picking it randomly, but just having an ongoing narrative internally about the story of what you're doing and where that's going. So that's our 5 ways to audience development to wellbeing. So hopefully you can reflect on those and think how you can integrate that and feel that that enables you to be active in the audience development. So there's, you know, lots of ways of presenting your stories and videos and diagrams and infographics. I'm going to leave the Menti for you, the final one to do. It was just 2 questions as to which one of these things you're already doing and which ones you think you might want to do more of. So have a little reflect on that as our little parting gift. And remember that it is, you know, what we're trying to do is how have we involved people in an authentic way? Has that been good? Has that felt like a positive relationship? Are we thinking holistically? Are we thinking sustainably? Because this is the future. We will be constantly criticized if it doesn't look like we're being authentic and understanding and respectful. And are you, in delivering it, living by your own kind of values and those of your stakeholders? If the last 2 years have taught us anything, you know, whether we think about people's experience of pandemic, of Black Lives Matter, of what's happening now, we are, you know, the humanistic angle has got to be leading what we're doing. And as if you can think and talk transparently about that, then people will engage. They will enter into that conversation. So thank you very much. I think there's probably a few resources we can add as links to this. I'm just going to stop sharing that. So we'll add those to the bottom of the presentation. There's loads just about straightforward audience development, about different things that you can, different ways that you can draw on insight without actually having to do a whole job. And of course, there's ways that we can support you, I guess, thinking about planning audience development in this kind of frame, and making it a kind of lighter or a heavier kind of process and exercise, depending on where you are. Adam, any last? Oh.
No, I think you've summed that up really well. But yeah, please get in touch with questions as well.
So there's a lot in there. So I hope we've given you a bit of a reading list, which I think is what was part of the promise of today was. And if there's anything particular in there that you want to kind of pick up on, then please give us a shout and share your resources and ideas and thoughts. So thank you very much.